Gizmo, get the dildos. Gizmo, try out the dildos. How are the dildos? They're fine.
Hey guys, it's Callie and welcome back to my channel, and today I tell you everything to know for What We Do in the Shadows Season 4. A few months ago, FX announced that Season 4 of What We Do in the Shadows will premiere on July 19th, and I can't wait. If you're unfamiliar with the show, What We Do in the Shadows is a television series about a group of vampires whose day-to-day life is being captured by a documentary crew. It's based off a movie of the same name by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi, and I just love this show. The humor is very witty and punny, and the entire show is just really silly and fun to watch. It also does a really good job at balancing both episodic storylines with some really good overarching plot. Going into the series, I really thought it'd be just a lot of vampire fluff, but I was really surprised at how invested I became in the characters and their stories in such a short amount of time. And as a nice little cherry on top, it's also gay. It was a very unexpected but pleasant surprise. So with all that said, I've really been looking forward to Season 4 and just seeing where the story goes. But if you're like me, one of the biggest obstacles to watching a new season is not remembering all of the relevant conflict and plot points from prior seasons. And sometimes I just don't have enough time to rewatch an entire show before new episodes air. So I decided to rewatch the entire series and tell you everything you need to know for Season 4. Also, unlike my Sailor Moon video where I covered literally everything in the seasons leading up to the new movie, for this video I will be only focusing on arcs or characters that I think are essential to or might be referred to in Season 4. As I previously mentioned, the show has a lot of episodic storylines that don't really push the main plot forward, and personally I think it's more fun to watch those episodes yourself than to have somebody explain every little detail to you. Also, lastly, if you're new to my channel, welcome! I make recaps, recommendation, and reviews about mostly animated shows, but really whatever I'm hyperfixating on at the moment. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and check out the other videos on my channel. So without further ado, let's get into it. Vampires only, no familiars. As previously mentioned, the show follows a house of vampires living in Staten Island who are being filmed by a documentary crew. So let's meet the vampires. First, there's Nandor, the oldest vampire of the group and former leader of Al Canadad.
They would call me Nando the Relentless, because I just never relent.
Then there's Naja, a Greek-Romani vampire, and her husband Laszlo, who's from England and has survived both the plague and leprosy.
But I was quite lucky because it couldn't be seen. It was only one part of my anatomy.
Well, I can see it.
Next up, we have Guillermo, Nando's familiar of almost 10 years, who is constantly waiting for his chance to become a vampire.
This is a picture of me as our mom from Interview with the Vampire.
And lastly, there's Colin Robinson, who, unlike the other vampires in the house, is an energy vampire, meaning that instead of feasting on human blood, he feeds off the anger, annoyance, and boredom of both humans and vampires alike.
In fact, you probably know an energy vampire. We're the most common kind.
The vampires go about their daily lives until one day a mysterious letter arrives and declares that Baron Afanas, an ancient member of vampire royalty, will be arriving at the house the following evening. The vampires are confused as to why the Baron is suddenly visiting, but Guillermo thinks it might be because Nandor is finally going to make him a vampire. However, when the Baron brutally murders Naja and Laszlo's familiar on sight, it becomes clear that he's there for a different reason.
Quite scary.
Turns out the true purpose of the Baron's arrival is to see how much of the new world the vampires have conquered, which unfortunately isn't a lot. The vampires then begin to panic because if they don't conquer the new world by the time the Baron wakes up again, he will kill every single one of them. And to make matters worse, Nandor ends up not turning Guillermo into a vampire and instead gives him a glitter portrait of the two of them, which, while adorable, does greatly frustrate Guillermo.
I made you a vampire. Wow.
While the vampires plan how to take over Staten Island, Colin Robinson has a fling with an emotional vampire who feeds off pity. And this is something to note because it shows that different types of energy vampires exist and that they can feed off different human emotions. At the same time, Naja is reunited with the reincarnation of her past lover Gregor, who in this life is called Jeff.
Jeff, really? Jeff Sackler?
The two then begin to see each other in secret. After some brainstorming, the vampires come up with the idea to gain power by taking over the local city council. But when things don't really go as planned, they end up right back where they started. Meanwhile, Naja encounters a social outcast Jenna from the local college and, after hearing how sad her social life is, decides to turn her into a vampire.
I'd like you to drink something from this vial.
No. Is it vodka or something?
It is my blood.
Still out of ideas on how to conquer the new world, the vampires travel to a club in Manhattan to ask the powerful Simon the Devious for help. Nandor is excited to get out and make new friends, and Laszlo gets dressed up with his favorite cursed hat.
Laszlo's stupid hat. It's got a bloody huge curse on it.
At the club, Nando attempts to mingle and meet new people, but Colin Robinson seems to keep getting in his way. Guillermo is almost eaten by a vampire, and after Nando doesn't defend him, Guillermo storms off. In the VIP area, Simon agrees to help the vampires conquer the New World in exchange for Laszlo's cursed hat. But after Laszlo hands it over, Simon goes back on his word and kicks the vampires out of his club, leaving them both helpless and hatless. However, Simon's good mood doesn't last very long, as the cursed hat causes him to set his club on fire. Afterwards, Nando catches up to Guillermo and apologizes for how he treated him. He then makes it up to Guillermo by taking him on a flight over Manhattan, which is a really cute moment.
This is the best night of my life!
Unfortunately, it doesn't last very long as Nando accidentally drops Guillermo.
Whoops.
Luckily, Guillermo survives, and while at the hospital, Nando admits that he thinks of Guillermo as a friend, but gets embarrassed and wipes it from Guillermo's memory.
You are my friend. No, that didn't feel right. You'll forget I said anything.
Laszlo is also reunited with his hat while in the hospital and begins to wear it out, but ends up deciding against it, as if he wears the cursed hat, Guillermo will die. And this is a nice moment because it's one of the first times we get to see some depth to the characters and start to see how they really do care about one another in their own weird way. Nadja continues to meet up with Jeff/Gregor, and we learn that in every single one of his past lives, he's been brutally decapitated. And after a failed carnival date, Nadja forces Jeff to remember all of his past lives, and her true Gregor finally returns.
Desire will fuel my journey.
Oh, Gregor, it is you.
Back at the house, the Baron wakes up and demands a night on the town. However, the group still doesn't have a plan to conquer the New World and floats the idea of killing the Baron before he can kill them. And after the Baron continues to draw attention to the fact that they're vampires, the group realizes how big of a liability he is and go all in on killing him.
I think it might be better if he dies.
The night continues and things start to turn around. The group gets buzzed and they end up actually really bonding with the Baron. They abandon their previous plans of murder and the group party all night, making it back just before sunrise. They get ready to turn in after such a fun night when Guillermo suddenly opens the front door and showers the Baron in sunlight, thus killing him.
Shit.
The next morning, the vampires don't fully remember what happened as they were on drugs and believe that they're the ones who killed the Baron, much to Guillermo's relief. They hold a funeral for him in their backyard and give him one last sip of blood.
So just get them in.
The group is then summoned to the local vampire council as they are to be tried for the murder of Baron Afanas. Guillermo accompanies them where he meets a group of fellow familiars and begins to realize just how rare it is for a familiar to actually be turned into a vampire. At the trial, Guillermo confesses to murdering the Baron, which the council doesn't fully believe. However, they decide it's better to kill one human versus 3 vampires and decide to accept his confession nonetheless. But before they can kill him, Nando interrupts and claims that the group did in fact kill the Baron, thus saving Guillermo's life. The group is then sentenced to death and trapped at the bottom of a well where they are to await death by sun.
It's a very horrible way to die.
Very dramatic way to die.
After escaping the vampire council and accidentally killing yet another vampire, Guillermo meets up with Colin Robinson, and together the two of them are able to save the others.
Guillermo's here too. He was running around peeing himself. I didn't pee myself, master.
Things at the house slow down for a bit until Nandor begins to struggle with his existence after discovering his home country hasn't existed since 1401. Meanwhile, Nadja checks in on her baby vampire, who is struggling to say the least. Nadja takes Jenna home to help her achieve her full vampire potential, which is something that is heavily noted by Guillermo. The group struggle to find Jenna's special vampire ability, but eventually discovers she has the power of invisibility. And this fills Jenna with newfound confidence, and she leaves the house to go live her best vampire life, much to the jealousy of Guillermo. The house is then chosen for the biannual vampire orgy, a high-end event that holds a lot of pressure as anyone who throws a bad orgy is shunned by the vampire community.
I cannot even speak the name of the vampire that organized that monstrosity.
I don't give a fuck. His name was Mike.
The group prepared for the orgy and its various events, such as having an uncomfortable Guillermo practice narrating the activities of the orgy.
Someone is seductively riding a candlestick up and down.
Nadja and Laszlo continue to boss Guillermo around, and his patience begins to run thin as he isn't feeling like he's being listened to. Laszlo's feelings are also hurt when Nadja calls his pornos boring, and as a result, he refuses to attend the orgy. While shopping for party supplies, Nandor and Guillermo run into Guillermo's friend Jeremy, who just so happens to be a virgin, aka a vampire's favorite food. Nandor demands that Guillermo bring Jeremy to the orgy, but Guillermo struggles with this internally, as this time he'll instantly know the person he's killing.
I think you did a good job as a familiar. Maybe not so much as a friend.
However, while Laszlo interrupts and ruins the orgy, Jeremy loses his virginity in the next room, thus saving both his life and Guillermo's conscience. In the season finale, Guillermo has all the vampires' DNA tested, but Nadja and Laszlo refuse to see their results due to their fear of semen-stealing witches. Colin Robinson is excited to learn more about himself, only to discover that he's just 100% white. And Nandor discovers that he has over 200,000 living descendants, one of which resides in Staten Island. And as a result, Nandor, Guillermo, and Colin Robinson decide to go visit Nandor's descendant, only for him to accidentally scare her to death.
Oh no.
And the sudden passing of his relative causes Nandor to feel grief, possibly for the first time in his existence. Back at the house, Gregor attempts to visit Nasha, but is driven off by Laszlo, who reveals that he is the one who has beheaded Gregor in every one of his past lives. When Nasha questions Laszlo as to why he did it, he reveals it's because she's always so hurt when Gregor returns, and he can't stand to see his wife in that much pain. The two then have a romantic embrace and send Gregor off to live his life. Or it seems that fate has other plans, as his head is accidentally cut off on their front lawn.
I swear that had nothing to do with me.
And if you're wondering about Guillermo's DNA test, turns out he's related to Van Helsing. Yeah, that Van Helsing, greatest vampire hunter to ever live. This might explain how he's so good at killing vampires and why his abilities seem to only be growing stronger. Season 2 begins after an action-packed summer. Guillermo has spent the past few months killing vampire assassins in order to protect the house, and Laszlo and Nadja have a new bro-y familiar, Topher.
Toverino! Oh, look out!
Topher neglects his familiar duties, much to Guillermo's frustration, and at one point even casually invites a vampire assassin into the house. Luckily, he doesn't last very long, as he dies trying to fix something Guillermo told him not to touch.
Just leave it alone.
After Topher's death, the vampires decide to take his corpse to a necromancer in order to bring him back to life. However, the reincarnation doesn't go as expected, as Topher is more of a zombie than Guillermo remembers, but none of the vampires seem to believe him. Topher chases Guillermo around the house and almost devours him, but Nandor shows up to save Guillermo at the last minute. And while Guillermo is thankful for this action, his frustrations continue to pile up and he begins hiding wooden stakes in his new mini-fridge. Rent activities begin to occur throughout the house, and Nadja concludes that they have ghosts. Nandor and Laszlo initially laugh this off as they don't believe in ghosts, but eventually change their minds after seeing the ghost of Jeff, who has appeared due to his unfinished business. And this gets them wondering if they each have their own ghosts, as technically the vampires did all die at one point. Well, at least the regular vampires did. We don't really know what's up with Colin Robinson. Eventually their curiosities get the best of them, and they hold a seance to summon their ghosts and help them move on. Nandor reunites his ghost with the ghost of their horse John.
Aspen. John.
Laszlo helps his ghost finish his business, and Nadja and her ghost hit it off so well that they decide to keep her around in the body of a doll. And poor Jeff is ignored and leaves with his business still unfinished. Maybe, I don't know. We don't really see him after this point, so who knows what happens to him.
See you again soon, you tasty little honeypot.
Guillermo continues his search for virgins and thinks he'll have some luck at the local mosquito club, which actually turns out to be a group for vampire hunters. Seems like the universe is trying to tell Guillermo something. And hey look, it's Jenna's roommate from season 1. Turns out that after her roomie became a vampire and disappeared, she decided to join the group to prevent this from happening to anyone else. And this shakes up Guillermo a bit, as he's forced to think about all the families of his victims and the consequences of his actions as a familiar. Guillermo ends up continuing to meet with the vampire hunting group in order to sabotage any plans that might put the house in danger. However, this doesn't go exactly as planned, as the group sets out to ambush a house that sounds an awful lot like the one Nandor and the others live in. Luckily, it ends up being a different house, but a house full of vampires nonetheless. Guillermo goes into vampire killing mode and saves the rest of the group from being killed, but unfortunately, one member, Derek, isn't able to make it out.
I could fight Derek!
It's too late for him now.
At work, Colin gets a promotion, but initially turns it down as the new position would cut into his roommate time. But after his roommate shut him later that day, he decides to take the position. He also mentions how hard it is to be an energy vampire, because even when you're trying to be sincere and want to hang out with people, everybody just thinks you're trying to drain them. On the bright side, Colin's new position gives him ample opportunities to drain his coworkers, and the power begins to go to his head, quite literally. And this change is noticed by his roommates as his demeanor becomes more hostile and he attempts to turn the house against one another. We also learn that the group met Colin Robinson because he, quote, came with the house. Colin's powers continue to grow and he gains new abilities such as being able to fly and drain humans just by looking at them. He's even able to drain the regular vampires to the point where they begin to age. Eventually, he separates himself into 3 separate entities so he can triple the amount of energy he drains and also have some friends.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
However, unfortunately for him, 3 Collins end up accidentally draining each other, thus reverting the original Colin Robinson back to his normal state. Sometime later, Laszlo and Nadja run into Simon the Devious, who is now living in the sewers after losing his club in a fire. And all that remains of his previously large crew is Count Rapula and his new partner Carol.
Good heavens.
There she is.
Nadja takes pity on Simon and invites him to stay at their house, an offer that Simon quickly takes her up on. However, Laszlo isn't as welcoming, as he suspects Simon has only moved in to steal back the cursed hat. While the vampires rest, Carol reveals to Guillermo that she knows he's a slayer. She then attempts to eat him and causes Guillermo to accidentally kill her. Nandor walks in on the scene and convinces Guillermo to keep this a secret from the others. Granted, he's now a little more wary of Guillermo. The next night, Simon reveals his true intentions and demands the hat back from Laszlo. The two fight over it and eventually make their way back to the sewer, where Laszlo is ambushed by the rest of Simon's crew and forced to turn over the hat. However, the curse strikes again and Simon becomes trapped underwater, allowing Laszlo to take ownership of the hat once again. In the next episode, Nandor's previous familiar Benji arrives, stating that Nandor is going to make him a vampire. Nandor reveals he previously hypnotized Benji to forget about his time as a familiar, but after using Lumosity, Benji was able to regain his memories and is returned to cash in on that promise of eternal life. At the monthly familiar mixer, Guillermo discovers a familiar he knows, Celeste, has been turned into a vampire. And, on top of that, she's promising that all of her new familiars will be turned in 8 months or less, which is a pretty tempting offer for Guillermo, as he's going on 11 years of service with not a lot to show for it. Back at the house, Guillermo asks Nandor if he's ever going to make him a vampire because there's a better offer on the table. But after Nandor coldly tells Guillermo that he should take the better offer, Guillermo decides to leave and the two have a bitter parting.
Okay, then.
Later that night, Nandor realizes Guillermo is a better familiar than he gave him credit for and goes to Celeste's place to reconcile. Unfortunately, their meeting doesn't go very well as Nandor still isn't really listening to Guillermo and the pair fail to make up. However, things also aren't going so perfectly for Guillermo as Celeste continues to postpone making any of her familiars vampires. And eventually, it's revealed that Celeste isn't even a vampire herself and was only pretending to be one while her master was on vacation. And speaking of her master, she's back early and she's pissed. Guillermo escapes Celeste's apartment unharmed and runs into Nandor, who admits he's been unhappy since Guillermo left and he wants to win him back. Guillermo asks to be more appreciated and respected, as well as get one day off a week. He also makes Nandor promise to turn him into a vampire, and while Nandor doesn't specify exactly when that will happen, he does agree to one day turn Guillermo. The two then reconcile and drop off Benji at some random gas station where Nandor appears to actually have turned him into a vampire. Nandor and Laszlo are then kidnapped by witches who want to steal their semen, as vampire semen has anti-aging properties. But Guillermo once again saves the day after he offers a business proposal that will provide the witches with an unlimited amount of semen.
It's not like there's not enough to go around. That stuff is everywhere.
However, despite saving the day, Guillermo still feels underappreciated and has finally reached his limits. He packs up all of his things and leaves the house for good.
He's gone.
The vampires struggle with Guillermo's absence, and the house quickly falls into disarray as they can't even figure out how to pick up their dry cleaning. But their moods quickly improve after receiving an invitation to the Theater des Vampires, a highly exclusive theatrical performance. After the vampires leave, Guillermo returns to the house to retrieve his forgotten mini-fridge. While there, he notices how messy the house has become and learns the vampires have left to attend the play. However, after a closer inspection of the invitation, Guillermo realizes the whole thing is a trap set up by the Vampiric Council and rushes to save them. At the theater, the rest of the vampires have been trapped and are about to be executed when Guillermo arrives just in time to save them all. He then proceeds to kill an entire room full of vampires and finally reveals his slayer status to the group.
My name's Guillermo de la Cruz.
Don't care what the fuck your name is. We have to pick up our own laundry.
A month has passed since Guillermo killed an entire room of vampires, and the house is still processing the fact that he's a slayer. While his fate is being decided, they've imprisoned Guillermo in the basement. Granted, they don't do a very good job at it, as he's able to sneak out every morning and do the daily chores.
And here's the little secret.
Nadja and Laszlo vote to kill Guillermo as they view him as a threat, but Nandor defends him, arguing that all the killing was done to save their lives. Nandor also points out that the group is still wanted by the Vampiric Council, so having Guillermo around to protect them might not be a bad idea. They continue their debate until one night a vampire known as the Guide arrives with a message from the Supreme Worldwide Vampiric Council. And to everyone's surprise, the group is not in trouble and instead have been chosen as the new leaders of the local Vampiric Council.
I have done the bidding for countless fearsome and legendary councils. And now we have these guys which is whatever, it's above my pay grade.
After receiving the good news, the group agrees to keep Guillermo alive and end up promoting him from familiar status to vampire bodyguard. They then quadruple hypnotize him to ensure that he will never physically harm any of them. But surprise, surprise, hypnosis doesn't work on Guillermo. The vampires then go in for their first day as Vampire Council leaders and discover that while there were 3 of them, only one of them can be the official head of the council. Laszlo takes himself out of the running, and Nandor and Nasha agree to share the role of leader for now, but both have plans to overthrow the other in the future. At his local gym, Nandor struggles to make progress with his crush Meg and approaches Laszlo for help. Asks Laszlo to use the Cloak of Duplication to pose as Nandor and help win over Meg. Colin Robinson actually ends up taking the first attempt and fails miserably. Then Laszlo tries to woo her over and also fails miserably. And finally, it's Guillermo's turn. Now luckily for Guillermo, Laszlo has hypnotized Meg to forget about the previous failed flirting, so Guillermo's got a clean slate. And he actually ends up having more luck with Meg, and the two meet up after she gets off work. They have a pretty good conversation, and Guillermo's able to get some stuff off his chest, which leads Meg to assume that Nandor, aka Guillermo, likes Guillermo, aka Nandor.
Could be he has feelings for you too.
Feelings? No, that's... Gotta go.
And there it is, folks, gay canon. So if you've been wondering why I've been including random dialogue clips, or I've been focusing on seemingly inconsequential details regarding Guillermo and Nandor, this is why. So yeah, now we know canonically Guillermo's in love with Nandor. And while we don't know for certain what Nandor's feelings are, it's heavily implied that he feels some form of affection for Guillermo. It's kind of funny because when I first watched this, I was kind of caught off guard and wasn't really expecting it. But rewatching this series, I don't know how I missed it. Like, there are clues all over the place, even as early as season 1. But yeah, I'm gonna stop myself here because I could talk about the queer subtext all day and we still have a lot to get through, so let's get back on track. Nasha becomes increasingly preoccupied with council duties, which results in Laszlo spending more time with Colin Robinson. The two then decide to explore the Vampire Council library, as Colin Robinson wishes to learn more about where energy vampires come from, as he's turning 100 years old this year. Plus, Laszlo's excited for their extensive pornography collection.
The Tocqueville Lusty Discharge pamphlet with discharge on it by the feel of it.
And as Laszlo and Colin Robinson spend more time together, the two actually grow surprisingly close and have some really nice bonding moments. Back at the house, Nandor's off-again, on-again partner Gale returns, much to Guillermo's dismay. Nandor reveals that he's going to propose to Gale that evening and turn her into a vampire so the two can spend eternity together. However, after realizing it's a full moon, Gale rushes to leave, but not before turning into a werewolf on the front lawn, much to the disgust of the house. The group go to confront Gale and get to the bottom of the things, only to discover her making out with a fellow werewolf. The vampires and werewolves then fight Twilight style in a kickball game, where Nasha accidentally kills Gale.
That was an accident!
Shit.
No, I did an accident! Stop filming!
In order to save her life, Nandor turns Gale into a vampire and asks her to marry him. Unsurprisingly, she turns him down again. For some reason, this rejection doesn't seem to hurt as much. It's because this time Nandor has Guillermo. That's the subtext. In the next episode, gang travels to Atlantic City to celebrate their neighbor's anniversary. The vampires attempt to make Guillermo feel more included, and he starts to open up about his home life.
It is tough. I mean, I remember being 10 or 11 when I first realized that I was...
Now, something to note is that vampires cannot rest without their ancestral soil. So, whenever they travel, they have to bring some of it in a little bag and spread it under their bed. However, to the hotel cleaning staff, this just looks like dirt, and so they vacuum that stuff right up. The vampires then begin to panic as they cannot rest or use their powers without their dirt, and send Guillermo to Europe to gather soil from the ancestral places. While waiting Guillermo's return, Nandor learns about the Big Bang Theory, and his current understanding of the world is shattered. He then begins to question the meaning of life, and starts to feel really alone in the world. Guillermo finally returns with the soil, and the vampires rejoice as they can rest again. They then give him a really nice thank you gift, which is a really sweet gesture.
You are a very good familiar, and familiar is crossed out and replaced with bodyguard.
You're the bodyguard.
Back in Staten Island, Nandor and Nasha hold their first trials as leaders, which Guillermo uses as an opportunity to sway the decisions in his favor. However, this quickly backfires when Nasha and Nandor sentence his acquaintance Derek to death. Remember Derek from season 1? He was part of the vampire hunting club and thought to be dead.
I could fight Derek!
It's too late for him now.
Well, turns out he's not dead and is actually a vampire, and a pretty obvious one, so he's sentenced to death as he's a giant liability. Luckily, Guillermo thinks of a solution and saves the day once again, convincing the vampires to spare both Derek and his golden retriever Hellhound. There's also a B-plot in this episode where Laszlo gets involved in an MLM scheme, and while this doesn't really do anything for the plot, I do enjoy this bit of dialogue.
And then Nandor and his boyfriend don't even show up?
Crisis then strikes as the sire, the first ever vampire, has escaped the Vampire Council and is now running loose in Staten Island. Nandor and Naja panic, not only because it looks bad on them as leaders, but also because if the vampire who made you dies, you die as well. And since all vampires are descended from the sire, if he dies, they all do. However, Laszlo says that's just a myth and points out that if it were true, both he and Naja would have died when the Baron did. But just to be sure, he and Colin Robinson go to dig up the Baron and check if he's actually dead. And surprise, surprise, he's alive.
Baron, are you there?
Yes.
Oh my god. Shit.
Turns out his last sip, combined with the blood-soaked dirt from all the dead bodies buried in the yard, allowed him to slowly regain his strength. And while the house is excited to see him alive, it only further proves the if the sire dies, we all die theory, and they begin to panic. But Guillermo thinks of a way to save the day again, and actually gets to act like a leader for once, so good for him. Also, Guillermo's back must be aching from carrying this entire damn season. Like, the guy is really doing the most. With Guillermo's help, the group is able to successfully trap the sire and end up allowing him to live with the Baron in a cabin where the two can prey on unsuspecting Airbnb guests.
You're just in time for dinner.
The house then celebrates Nandor's Ascension Day, which is the day that he became Supreme Viceroy of Alcanadad. And while the event is usually a giant party for the house, Nandor doesn't seem as into it this year and sadly ignores Guillermo's little crocheted versions of them. It turns out that between discovering his home country no longer exists and learning that his entire understanding of the universe was wrong, Nandor's really been struggling with his purpose in life and has what they call vampire depression.
I'm 700 years old, and what have I got to show for it? I'm a fully grown vampire and I still have roommates.
In an attempt to cheer Nandor up, House sends him on a vampiric mission to a local wellness center. There, he meets the owner Jan, who claims that her and her followers are not actually vampires, but humans instead. Turns out the wellness clinic is a community of vampires in the process of becoming human again, with their leader Jan even being able to eat and drink human food. Of course, this is all a lie, and in reality, the place is just a cult. But to Nandor, this seems like the purpose that he's been looking for, and so he decides to leave the house to join Jan. Guillermo argues with Nandor and tries to stop him from leaving.
Well, I want to find happiness too. What do you think I've been doing for the last 11 years?
Oh boy,
why do you think I've lived with you this whole time?
And when that doesn't work, he begs Nandor to at the very least turn him into a vampire before he goes, so they both can be happy. However, Nandor says that he views vampirism as a curse, and he cares too much about Guillermo to subject him to it. After a tearful goodbye, Nandor releases Guillermo from his service as a familiar, and the two part ways.
Are you shitting me? You can't just walk out into the street like that. You have to look both ways. That's literally rule number one of being human.
A month has passed since Nandor's departure, and the house is honestly doing just fine without him. Guillermo, however, has been taking the sudden departure pretty hard and decides to go to the wellness center to check up on his old master. But at the center, Nandor's been doing just fine. In fact, he's been having the time of his life. He's found a new purpose, a new community, and he finally feels like he belongs somewhere. When Guillermo arrives, he's quickly exposed as a slayer and fights his way out, taking Nandor with him. The two then get into a fight as Guillermo says that Nandor's been brainwashed, and Nandor's upset he was taken from a place he truly felt at home.
Did you ever consider for one moment that I might be happy for the first time in decades? That I found somewhere where I feel that I belong?
But Guillermo's not having it, and he forcibly takes Nandor home, which actually turned out to be a good thing as Jan sends out her cult to die in the sun the following morning. Back at the house, Nandor has been properly imprisoned in the basement until the group can get him back to normal. However, ever since leaving the center, Nandor has felt even more lost and directionless than ever and makes the ultimate decision.
It is time for me to take a super slumber.
Now, super slumber is when a vampire decides to go into a death-like slumber from anywhere from 50 to 300 years. And it's a very drastic decision, as when the vampire wakes up, any vampire companions they once had will have moved on, and every human they once knew will be dead. But as it's typically the last resort for a vampire, the decision must be respected despite the protests of Naja, Laszlo, and especially Guillermo. The group gathers to say their parting words to Nandor, and he then enters his super slumber, leaving them all for good. However, they don't have too much time to grieve as they receive some urgent news. Turns out the Worldwide Vampiric Council will be arriving in mere hours in order to assess Naja and Nandor's progress as leaders. There's just one problem. Nandor's in a super slumber. Oh, and it also conflicts with Colin Robinson's 100th birthday party. Guillermo wakes up Nandor, much to his annoyance, and Laszlo suggests postponing the slumber so Nandor can attend both the delegation and Colin Robinson's birthday party. However, Nandor isn't having it and suggests telling the council that Naja killed him in order to secure her power, and with that, he returns to his slumber. The council arrived and, as expected, asked about Nandor. Naja admits she killed him as he was a threat to her power, and surprisingly, the council respects and admires her decision. The rest of the dinner goes well until Laszlo interrupts with a toast to Colin Robinson. And while this was very heartfelt, it was also a pretty big buzzkill, and Nasha asks Laszlo why he's so obsessed with Colin Robinson's 100th birthday.
Colin Robinson is dying.
What?
Yep, turns out months ago, while Colin Robinson and Laszlo were exploring the council's library, Laszlo discovered that energy vampires have a life expectancy of exactly 100 years. So he decided to keep it a secret from Colin Robinson and tried his best to make the last few months of his life memorable. The group gathers for Colin Robinson's final moments, and Guillermo rushes to wake up Nandor so they can all be together in the end. However, it ends up being too late, and with that, Colin Robinson is dead.
This is very sad.
The group struggles with Colin Robinson's death and avoid processing their grief. In fact, shortly after their loss, the group has a new portrait made without Colin Robinson in it so they can pretend he never existed. Also, while the portrait is made, the Baron makes this comment.
Also, I feast upon hate.
And I want to talk about this really quick because while it may have just been a throwaway line, there could be some very heavy lore implications here. So hear me out. We know that Colin Robinson is an energy vampire who feeds off of enraging or boring humans and vampires alike, and we know that there are different types of energy vampires, as Colin Robinson's ex from season 1 was an emotional vampire who drained people via pity. So it would make sense that there are vampires that can feed off of feelings such as hatred, right? The only issue is that the Baron is a regular vampire, or so it seems. We know that the Baron drinks human blood just like Nandor, Laszlo, and Naja, so how can he feed on both blood and hatred? I don't know, I'm just wondering if because this season focused so heavily on the mystery surrounding energy vampires and where they come from, that there might be some connection or subtle lore in this dialogue. Or the line was just thrown in last minute. Who knows? Anyway, with all that's happened, Nandor decides that he needs a fresh start, and after some planning help from the guide, he decides to travel the world to get away from everything, Guillermo included. Understandably, Guillermo panics and seeks out Nasha for help convincing Nandor to stay, only to discover that she's been invited to serve on the Supreme Vampire Council in London. The only problem is, Laszlo's sworn to never return to England, a fact that Guillermo tries to take advantage of to prevent anyone from leaving. However, after learning about Nasha's promotion, Laszlo abandons his previous vow, and the pair officially decide to leave the house.
Count me in.
No.
Guillermo's feelings finally boil over, and he confronts Nandor about leaving him behind, pointing out that Guillermo's been the one protecting Nandor this entire time. He also reveals that he faked being hypnotized by the group earlier in the season, and the two begin fighting. Guillermo ends up with the upper hand, and after realizing this, Nandor admits that he thought Guillermo had gone soft, but tonight proved how skilled Guillermo really is. Nandor then asks Guillermo to accompany him on his trip around the world, and gives his word that when they arrive at Nandor's homeland, he will make Guillermo a vampire. With that, everybody's happy. Nasha and Laszlo prepare to leave for England, and Guillermo gets to stay with Nandor.
Traveling the whole world with my Nanda master.
Nandor heads off to the train station first, and Guillermo goes to send off Naja and Laszlo. However, things don't go according to plan, as Laszlo traps Guillermo in a coffin and sends him off to London in Laszlo's place.
Wait for me!
As it turns out, right before leaving, Laszlo went to say his final goodbyes to Colin Robinson, only to discover that he had been reborn as a baby. So, Laszlo decided to stay behind and take care of the helpless child. And that's where the season ends, with Guillermo stuck on a ship to London and Nandor being forced to leave without him. So there you go. That's everything you need to know for What We Do in the Shadows Season 4. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like and subscribe if you aren't already, and let me know what you guys think. I know that for Season 4, I'm personally wondering how they're going to reunite the entire group, because the trailer shows them all reunited in the house, and I'm wondering if we're going to have some kind of time skip or what they're going to do there. I'm also curious about Freddy, which is a new character I've kind of seen floating around on Twitter, because I think he's a potential love interest for Guillermo, which is really exciting. But the trailer also shows Nandor aggressively searching for a wife, and I think maybe having a potential love rival might help Nandor realize what his true feelings are for Guillermo. The only thing I'm not looking forward to in Season 4 is baby Colin Robinson, because a baby energy vampire just sounds awful, and like, just look at that thing. Yeah, that'll do it for this video. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. I know I say this every time, but I really do have a lot of fun making videos, and it just really means a lot that people are out there watching them, so just thank you guys. Yeah, that's all that I got, so I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!